Hey there crafter, welcome to part 2 of DIYing retro ornaments. This is where I take some ornaments that my great grandmothers and great aunts made and I show you how you can duplicate and DIY these ornaments. Be sure to check out part 1 if you missed that. I released that today as well, but let's get into our last few ideas. Next up, we're going to make this plastic canvas birdhouse. Now, if you're not familiar with plastic canvas, it's basically like cross-stitching with yarn, and it's just a sheet of plastic that has a grid cut out that you can cross-stitch in. It might look really complicated and involved, but really it's just 6 squares stitched together, so let's make this project. So you'll want to start by cutting out some squares. 4 of them need to be 10 spaces by 10 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's what I mean by 10 spaces, just a nice little square. And then my 2 roof pieces that are bigger, these are both 13 spaces by 13 spaces. And this stuff is really easy to cut, and once you cut out your square, you'll want to cut any little nubs off. So I'm just showing this little scrap here, we're just kind of going along, cutting off the nubs to make our edges smooth. And then one of my 10 by 10 squares, I'm going to cut out a little square in the middle here. I'm going to leave 2 spaces and then cut out a few spaces here to create the opening of the birdhouse. And I'm cutting out 3 sections, so a little 3 by 3 square and keeping a 2 square margin along the edge. And of course you'll want to trim off those little nubs. But once you've cut your pieces out, you're going to want to cut out some pieces of yarn and stitch your design on there. Now, I was going to show you how I stitched these, but if I were to show you how I stitched these, it would like triple the length of this video. But you can stitch these however you want. You can just work along and just do the little angled stitches, kind of like you would for cross stitch. And we don't tie the tails off, we just work around them on the back. So I just go up a stitch, down and over a stitch at an angle, go up, down and over, and I'll probably do my front piece like this. This is the easiest way, but because there's so many small stitches, it does take a while. So that's why for my sides, I just did these longer stitches. So this is what it looks like with just that basic stitch. Another thing you can do is you can do like a whip stitch around the edges. I'll do it around this opening here, but not around the edges because the edges are going to get stitched together, so they'll get covered. But to do a whip stitch, you always go in the same direction with your needle. So I'm always going top down through my stitches. And it just wraps it around the edge there. So I'm going to do that edging in yellow, but let me show you how to finish off your strand of yarn. Basically flip it over to the back side and just run your tail through some of the stitches. Again, this is very similar to what you do with cross stitching. And then once your tail is secure, just trim it off. So now that I've cut out and stitched up my pieces, it's time to fasten them together. I'm gonna have my front piece and attach 2 of the smaller pieces on the bottom of it, and then 1 on the back. So I'm gonna start by attaching my 2 side pieces. I'm gonna leave my tail to the inside, line them up, and then I'm gonna do a whip stitch, where every time I'm gonna go down through both of them, come around the outside, go down through the next hole in each of them. I'm just kind of catching that yarn tail there, so I work over it. Cinch it up, and just keep working all the way along this bottom edge. Now that I've gone down this edge, I'm just going to run it through to the inside and run my tail underneath those stitches I just worked and cut it off. Next, I'm going to attach the back piece. So I'm going to start in this top right corner and run it through towards me, leaving that little tail on the inside. And then I'm going to go through my stitches. So I'll go through the top hole here and the top hole down here. Whether you go through from the top or whether you go through from the bottom doesn't matter, as long as every stitch you go through from the same direction. Now that I've stitched these 2 sides together, I'm going to stitch the other sides together using the same process. And now that I've stitched along that side, I'm gonna run through to the inside of my birdhouse and run my tail underneath my stitching to keep it from unraveling. In the same manner, I'm going to attach the front. So now that this is attached together, it's time to add the roof. So with the roof, I'm going to first stitch along the tops to fasten them together, and we'll do this the same whip stitch technique we've been using. And now I'm going to stitch the roof onto the body of my birdhouse. Personally, I like to start at the peak just so I can make sure everything gets lined up well, so I'm going to run through the top and leave that tail on the inside to get wrapped around my stitching. I'm going to go up through the peak here. And we're not going to whip stitch this because we're going to have a little bit of an overhang. So we're going to kind of go up and down through the roof and then just weave around the edge of the birdhouse body. I'm just doing it up, down, between the stitches. This is for sure the trickiest part to stitch together, so as long as you get it stitched together, it's going to turn out awesome. I believe in you. And I'm going to finish stitching all the way around my house, and then I'll just run the tails to the inside and my birdhouse will be assembled. So now I've stitched it all together, I'm just going to run this tail through some of the stitching on my roof to fasten it off. I'll cut the tail and then it'll be complete. And here is my finished birdhouse. I think this turns out so cute. And I love the colors I went with. I think they're so fun. No, I'm just not fancy enough to have a plastic dove to put on there, but maybe I'll find something that I can add to this ornament. But it's still super cute just as an empty birdhouse. Our last project is another plastic canvas ornament, and this one is to make a little bell. So for this bell ornament, I decided to get fancy, and I'm using 2 different colors of yarn and 2 different colors of the plastic. You of course can do all the same color or more than 1 color, but to assemble our bell, we will need 16 pieces cut out in this shape, and then we're going to stitch across each of those. So again, the shape is cut out of one of these sheets of plastic. Let me give you some number counts so you know how big it needs to be. So we're gonna have a flat edge here along the bottom that's gonna have 4 spaces, and then along the diagonal, we're gonna count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll have a flat side with 1, 2, 3, a flat edge of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then counting these diagonals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then a straight edge across 1, 2, 3, 4, diagonal 1, and then diagonal all the way down to where we started. And the count here is 11. So you're going to want to cut out 16 pieces that are this shape. So the first one is a little bit trickier to get cut out, but once you have the first one cut out, I just line it up on my plastic and use it as a template and cut it out with my scissors. Once you have 16 of these cut out, it's time to stitch them. So to stitch these, I grab a piece that's about arm's length. You really don't need very long for one of these. And I'm going to start with the long piece pointing to the left, and I'm going to go down through the bottom along this side that's got 4 right here. And we'll leave a little tail that will work over. And then I'm going to come up that same row from the back. Then go over a row, go to the bottommost one of that row and go down. And then come up at the opposite end of that row. Shift over a row and go down. And then come up at the top of that row. And I'll keep working this all the way till the top. And now that I've stitched all the way to the top, I'm just going to run my needle down through the loops we've stitched and trim the tail. So this side will look a little something like this side will look something like this. So now that all my pieces are ready, it's time to stitch them together. I'm going to cut out 2 pieces of my yarn, and the first piece I'm going to run through this very top intersection on the flat side here, this tall side. Run it through right there. And I'm going to do this on all of them to stack them up. So I'm going to go gray, then green, gray, green until I've got them all stacked at the top. So now I have all 16 of them strung together at the top. You might kind of see where this is going, how once we cinch it up, it'll form the bell shape. Before we cinch it up, let's run our second piece through the bottom. So I'm going to find, if we come down this edge, this piece right here, and I'm going to run this yarn through all of my pieces at that spot. So now I have a yarn piece running through the top and through the bottom, and we're going to just tie these together. So I like to tie the one, leave it kind of loose, tie the bottom, again leaving it kind of loose, and then grabbing my top tails and my bottom tails, then cinch it up. I'll tie several knots that way it stays together very securely. In this piece, I'll even tie a little knot up at the top to create a hook for hanging it, like a little loop. Then we'll finish cinching up the bottom. And I'm just going to tuck those yarn tails up inside the ornament where no one will ever notice. But once you've got it fastened together, your ornament is complete. And you can also add little jingle bells along here if you want, or any other details to decorate it. All right, let's compare mine with the original. I gotta say, this one didn't turn out half bad at all. The only thing I would change is I would do a different color because I feel like the green yarn and the green plastic clash just a little bit, but you know, it's still super cute, pretty easy to put together, and overall a fun DIY ornament to make. So those are my 5 DIY retro ornament ideas. These are so much fun to make, so make sure that stick around and watch a few more videos on my channel. But when you're done watching my videos, make sure you actually give these projects a try. They're so much fun, and you can do these DIYs with your kids or with your parents, and these are a great way to make memories. And who knows, maybe 50 years from now, your great-grandchildren will be going, I wonder how great-grandma DIY'd these. I'm gonna figure it out and try making the same projects. I'd appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribe to my channel. It helps support me and I'd be so appreciative. But this is the video. Thank you for watching and happy crafting.